Okay, here we are with another in weekly chats after the draft, after one OTA practice. Should be plenty to talk about. Let's get to it. From Michael Corleone, love the name. Were you surprised the Cowboys signed Ryan Williams so quickly? I can't help but feel the Cards cut him too early. It's hard to say they cut him too early. They did give him 3 years. I think you can look, though, at that third year and think, did they really give him a chance? Bruce Arians was so frustrated in camp with him not playing because of knee soreness that he never played it down all season. He was inactive. I think that's where the real debate comes. Should they have played him or not? Certainly had the opportunity with Rashad Mendenhall's injuries and being out and being hobbled. Um, I think it was time to move on. I think it was obvious he wasn't going to play here. I think at some point they tried to get something for him, late round pick, something, and that's difficult to do when everybody knows you're pretty much going to cut the guy anyway. So we'll see if what Ryan does with the Cowboys. He was a good guy here, it seemed like, and I think he was earnest and trying to come back from injury. So you want to see the guy at least get a chance. From Francisco. Who is your offensive and defensive player breakout for the Cardinals this upcoming season? Good question. I think offensively, I think it would be easy to go with second-round pick Troy Nicholas, the tight end, but I'm going to go with running back Stephon Taylor. Played a limited role last year. I think he plays a bigger role this year with Andre Ellington bumping up to the starter. I think there's a real opportunity for Taylor to be more than a short yardage back and a goal line back. I think he can come in, give him some things that Andre Ellington can't, some strength between the tackles, some power. He's a really good pass blocker, tough kid. So I'd look for him. He's my pick. Defensively, it's hard. I thought about this question earlier. A lot of the guys, like I said, it's easy to say a Deone Buchanan, their first-round pick. I think it's probably too soon for their third-round pick, Kareem Martin. I think he'll be a situational player. I know the one guy that coaches are hoping breaks out, and they need to break out, is Kevin Mentor, their inside linebacker replacing Carlos Dansby. He really needs to develop. They like him. Different than Dansby, though. He's more of a run stopper, maybe more physical at the point of attack, but not nearly as fast as Carlos or as agile. He needs work in coverage. He needs work to become a three-down linebacker. I don't know that we'll see that from him at least right away, but we could. He's a real mature guy, soft-spoken. I think this means a lot to him. If he fails, it won't be from a lack of work or study or desire. From Steven, as always, thanks for your time. After the signing of Ted Ginn and drafting 2 wideouts, what are your thoughts of potentially releasing Larry at the end of the season? It could happen. It's going to be a sticky situation. His cap figure for 2015 is $23.5 million. He's due an $8 million bonus if he's on the roster at a certain time in March. Obviously, they can't carry $23.5 million of a cap figure, and it gets to the point a receiver or any player is at an age. Larry will be 32, I think, when the 2015 season starts. Now that's, receivers have been productive now into their mid-30s, but still, it's at an age where any player, you start to balance, okay, production versus money, and guys are asked to take pay cuts and restructure contracts, etc. And will Larry be willing to do that? And still, there's so much money in signing bonuses the Cardinals have already paid that it's going to be hard to account for all that against the cap. So, my thing is, if you're a big Larry Fitzgerald fan, as most people are, enjoy this season because you might not see him in a Cardinals uniform again. I think it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of creativity to make that happen. From Philo Badeau, has Bob McManaman been banned from participating in these recent AZ Cards chats? Yeah, Philo, we've tried to keep it under wraps, but we have banned him. We like to keep that kind of stuff private. No, I'm just kidding. We haven't banned him. He's more than welcome. His schedule hasn't worked out. He's been covering some baseball and doing some other things, and But hope to get him back here. Enjoy the chats with Mac. It gets a little off the wall, obviously, but off the wall is kind of fun. From Steven, what are your thoughts on the direction of right tackle for the Cardinals? I think Harold Goodwin, their offensive line coach, and Bruce Arians are being sincere when they say, they are thinking, hoping the answer's on the roster right now. In OTAs, it's Bradley Sowell is starting. Behind him is Bobby Massey. Nate Potter's a guy who could play there, although he's backing up on the left side now. To me, of the three, Bobby Massey is the most physically talented. And, when he started all of 2012, over the latter half of that season, he played pretty well. It'd be interesting to see if he takes that step forward. He disappointed coaches last year with the number of mental errors he made in training camp, and that's why, or in OTAs even, and that's why at the start of training camp they went and got Eric Winston. So I think they would like to avoid doing that now. I think a Bobby Massey, who knows the playbook, is probably more athletic than Eric Winston, potentially a better player, but that's also a big part of it. You have to know what you're doing out there. As Harold Goodwin told me a month or so ago, we think Carson Palmer's a franchise quarterback. We can't be getting him hurt because a guy doesn't know who he should block. Mark, kind of a follow-up, what's the static of Eric Winston? Still, patiently looking for a job. He's, now head of the Players Union from the players' side of it, been an eloquent spokesman for it. But he wants to play some more, and I think he's barely over 30. I think he's got some football left in him, but I think he, Darren College, and some other football players out there. Teams like to get through OTAs in the summer and kind of see where they are, and then maybe they sign those guys, or they get an injury or two in the first couple weeks of training camp, and they sign those guys. So I mean, Eric is, and most offensive linemen, but Eric especially, is really a smart guy. He knows how this thing works, and I think we'll see him in the league somewhere. I think if the Cardinals had their druthers, they'd rather start one of those three young guys there. From Anonymous, do they really think Minter can fill Dansby's shoes? Good question, and you get right to it. They don't think he's going to be Carlos Dansby. Carlos Dansby's are the exception, and really the Cardinals had a great combo with he and Darrell Washington in that they were similar. They could run, they could blitz, they could cover. They never came off the field. I think Kevin Minter, at least initially, and maybe this whole season, will be more of a prototypical run-stopping linebacker, and they're going to have to figure some things out to maybe bring him out of the game in third down situations. Do they bring in another safety, which, they've got some depth now in the secondary. They've got two cornerbacks in Patrick Peterson and Antonio Cromartie, who are as big as safeties, and that allows you to do different things with Cromartie. You can put him on a tight end. So it'll be interesting to see how Todd Bowles, the defensive coordinator, juggles this. But they're putting a lot on Kevin Minter right now. He's calling defensive signals in OTAs. He's a smart guy. He says he learned a lot playing with Dansby, how to be a pro. I think he's sincere. Like I said earlier, he's a very serious guy, and this means a lot to him. He's used to playing at a high level in college, but he's going to be different than Dansby. I think if Carlos Dansby's a size 13 shoe, then maybe Kevin Minter's a size 10 to start off with. If you want to use the filling shoes metaphor. From Aaron, do you expect Thomas to beat out Lindley at quarterback, even though Arians and company keep talking about how good Lindley is? I think Thomas is going to be on the roster as I would look at it right now. I don't think you draft a guy in the 4th round with the idea that you're going to cut him. But I do think they legitimately like Ryan Lindley, even though Arians yelled at him yesterday in practices for throwing the ball late, and would have resulted in an interception. But he yells at everybody. I think one thing, I know they keep saying Drew Stanton's on the roster and that he's number 2. There's nothing going on with that, but I think that's worth monitoring. You got a guy who hasn't thrown a pass in the league for 4 years. He's making, a decent amount of money. Do they finagle around and promote Lindley to number 2 and keep Thomas? I don't know if they could afford to do that, but definitely it's worth monitoring. And even though Arians has ruled it out, I kind of in the back of my head think, maybe the rest of us shouldn't be so quick. over the past day, Carson Palmer discussed how difficult it was picking up the offense last year and how this year it's night and day. How hard is it for the new receivers to pick up the offense? Judging by last year, it's really hard. I mean, anybody who watched him in the preseason and really through the first half of the season saw many times where Palmer threw the ball and there's no receiver in the area, and there should have been, and he and the receiver kind of looking at each other. There was a lot of this going on, a lot of raised hands, like where am I supposed to be? I was here, There hasn't been so much of that, so I think it was a difficult thing, especially for a guy like Larry Fitzgerald, who had played in Ken Wisenhunt's system for 6 years, knew it like the back of his hand. This was different, and he was not only learning one position, he was learning all three positions, and that's what Arians asks of his veterans. I think you'll see them demand more mentally out of Michael Floyd, for instance. I think Ted Ginn can handle it. I think it would be a lot to throw at John Brown, the rookie third-rounder coming from Pittsburgh State, to say, hey, okay, you're going to learn three positions. My inclination or my hunch is that they try to really narrow his focus and say, learn this one. But it's a difficult system. I think most NFL systems are. Receivers are required to obviously identify coverage, adjust routes, know when other teams blitzing so you can change a route if you're the hot read, etc. It's not an easy thing, especially in Arians' offensive system. From Johnny V, how concerned should we be with production at outside linebacker? Did the Cardinals purposely ignore it in the draft, or was the board just picked over at that position? I think the way they, number one, from all accounts, it wasn't a deep draft for outside pass rushers. And two, I think they built their board in a certain way and figured in maybe that outside linebacker wasn't a tremendous need, not with Sam Acho coming back from injury, Lorenzo Alexander coming back from injury, Alex Okafor coming back from injury. They've got Shaughnessy and Abraham. I think they feel like there's depth. Well, I know Bruce Arians said yesterday, it's one of the four most competitive positions on this team, along with inside linebacker, tight end, receiver, and he said four, but then he named five, like offensive line. So they think they've got bodies there, and they think they've got situational players there, including Kareem Martin, their third-round pick, who they can bring in and rush, with his hand on the ground or from a two-point stance. So they think they've got answers there. We'll see. From Guest, is Jake Ballard in serious contention to start at tight end, thereby threatening Rob Hauser's roster spot? Good point. Yesterday, and granted it was the first day of OTAs, but the starting tight ends were Jake Ballard and John Carlson. And it looked to me like Rob Hauser was used down the line with some other teams or as a situational player. So very interesting to monitor, especially with Troy Nicholas, a second-round pick. Now you've got four tight ends on the roster. They've got Darren Fells, a former basketball player that they're trying to develop. I think that could happen. Going to be interesting to see what happens with Rob Hauser. We keep, saying, past couple of years we've said it's is this a breakout season for him? I think this is a key season where he's really not so much expected to break out, but to hang on to a roster spot. That said, I think if the Cardinals were to release him, say in August or whenever, I think he would be snapped up pretty quick because he's still an athletic young guy that there's just too much talent and ability there to think somebody won't take a chance on him. From Paul H., Larry won't take a pay cut. Is that a direct quote from Larry or a projection from the local media? I would say that is a guess, an educated guess, or an educated projection from local media. Larry's not going to get backed into a corner saying, I won't take a pay cut, I will take a pay cut, I will do this, I will do that. He doesn't like talking about his contract status, so he's very, he's very hard to pin down. But like most professional players, but I think Larry especially this way, he's very aware of his contract, where he ranks in terms of wide receiver pay across the league. He thinks he's still in his prime and deserves to be paid as such. So, I don't know. A lot will depend on how the season goes, obviously, but if the Cardinals come to him and say, hey, Larry, can you take this amount of pay cut, I think that's going to be a difficult sell. Circumstances could change that. If it's a team that makes a run deep into the playoffs, maybe Larry's willing to do that to stay here. But as I said before, his contract is such, there's so much money that it would accelerate anyway, or not accelerate, but there's so much of signing bonuses that they have to count against the cap anyway. It's going to be difficult to juggle. Not to say it can't be done. The Cardinals have some good people, I think, in their front office who've done things like this before. I think you could start with Terry McDonough, Steve Keim's assistant, Mike Disner, who does their contracts, who does a lot of cap management, very bright guy. We'll see. It takes both sides to be motivated, but I go back to this last offseason, and really every offseason, we saw some really iconic players with franchises. We saw those guys released. I think of DeMarcus Ware leaving Dallas. I think of Jared Allen leaving the Vikings, and those guys can still play. So it happens. Will it happen here? We'll see. Like I said, my advice to Larry Fitzgerald fans who like seeing him in a Cardinals uniform: relish every moment this year. It could be his last in Arizona. We'll see. But great questions, and we'll do this again soon. Thanks a lot.